Hello, I am the Wolf, and I have been absent from making videos for a while because I had some things unexpectedly come up in my life. Not all of them were negative, some of them were positive. I do want to preface that. But nevertheless, they became a distraction, and I haven't been able to get down and do what I want to do. As you can see, I don't have any scripture pulled up, and that's because I read chapters 13 to 22 off camera, and basically I'm going to recap them here right now as the best I can, and then later I will go on to read chapter 23. I will live stream it, so you can follow twitch.tv/cheesecake cheetah. I'll put that up somewhere right around here. Um, you can see that later. Or if you don't want to, you like watching stuff on YouTube, it will be on later. Eric Wolf Productions. It should be on no later than an hour after I live stream. I don't know what time I'm going to live stream just yet, but I'm thinking probably 9 o'clock, maybe a little, maybe 9:30. I'll say 9:30, and then by 10:30, the um, I'll have the video up on YouTube. But let me just go ahead and recap 13 to 22 real quick, and essentially 13 to 20 is very easy. 21 and 22 is kind of where it gets there's more. So basically 13 to 20 is almost all parables. Is Jesus just telling parable after parable after parable after parable after parable? Um, it's interesting when people ask Jesus one question, they get like 3 to 4 answers in the form of a parable. Um, and all the parables teach the same lesson. Basically, humble yourself. Um, if you're if you're righteous, if you see yourself as righteous, basically God, you or yeah, God does not need you. Now, you don't need God. Sorry that I got those swapped. Because you're like, well, I'm righteous. I don't need to do anything to be saved. All right, cool. Go over there. But those who are willing to be saved, come to me because you're the ones that recognize you're in danger. He even puts it, a healthy person has no need for a doctor. Well, I paraphrase. I think he says physician, but a healthy person doesn't need a doctor, but the sick do, and that's kind of what Jesus is saying. There's one I want to discuss because I think a lot of people think it's an actual story, but it's a parable that Jesus tells. So I know like people who like to say, well, the Bible isn't real because this story is in it, but there's no historical evidence. And it's like, well, Jesus is telling a parable. And that would be the um, the son. Oh, the prodigal son. I totally forgot the word. The prodigal son. That is a parable that Jesus tells. Some of you may know it, some of you may not, but I'll give you a brief summary. Basically, what happens is that there's two sons and a father, and the younger son gets fed up living with his father. He's tired of doing what they do, so he goes to his father and asks for his inheritance, and to so he's like, give me my inheritance and let me leave. And so the father does that. He sells the land or whatever he does. He gives his son the money, and his son leaves and goes to another country. And he just spends all of his money. Literally, it says with prostitutes. He's just drinking all the time. He basically he asks for his inheritance and goes to ye old Las Vegas, basically, and just balls out in Las Vegas. And then he has nothing, and there becomes a huge famine. If we think about it like 1930s recession. Like basically that's what he got hit with. And he's this son has nothing, he has no food, he's starving. He gets a job, quote unquote. um I don't know why I went like this and then said quote unquote, but I did. Oh well, anyways, he gets a job feeding pigs. Like that's his whole job, but he's not paid for it, he doesn't get any food for it, nothing. He gets so hungry to the point where he's looking at pig food or pig slop. Now, I'm not a farmer. I don't know what pigs eat, but when it's referred to as slop, I assume it's not great. Um, and he's looking at that and going, I'm so hungry, I want to eat this. But he decides, you know what? My father's servants have enough to eat. They have rooms to sleep in. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to go home and I am just going to be like, sorry, father, I did this to you. Please make me a slave or a servant. Um, and his only motivation is food, is just to get bread. So he goes back home, and on his way, his father sees him from far off, runs out, hugs him, puts on the best robe, gives him some shoes, or I assume sandals, gives him sandals, puts a ring on his finger, brings him inside. They have a huge party. They kill a fatted calf so they could eat. The older brother is upset about this because he's like, hey, Dad, I've been with you the entire time that he's been in Las Vegas, ye old Las Vegas. How come you've never made this celebration for me? And he's like, son, I love you, and everything I have is yours. But your son who was dead, or your brother who was dead, is now brought back to life. We must rejoice and celebrate. Which, and that's where the parable ends. And basically it's left to say that Jesus, and there's like other parables. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my own words. There's other parables where it's like if you lose one sheep out of 99, you're going to go find that one sheep and be happy. If someone loses one coin and she searches and finds it, she's going to be happy, even though she has all those other coins. And the same thing with the prodigal son. It's like, yes, God is happy that he has all of these followers. And then there's this one person who, disappears, gets lost, loses his way, and then comes back. And it's a huge celebration that, hey, this person has come back to me. Um, which it hits even harder when when you understand what that young son was asking for when he asked for his inheritance, because he's basically saying, Father, you're no good to me. I wish you were dead. That's what he's saying. I want you to be dead so I can have what's mine and do whatever I please. He literally told his father, I wish you were dead. Give me my money. His father did it and he left. And yet his father still had the reaction of, hey, my son is home, celebrate. And that's Jesus's whole thing of like, that's how heaven and God will react when lost people come to him. So that's real interesting. And so that's basically the gist of all of the parables that he tells. If you want to read them, go ahead. It's just a long, just a lot of parables with all pretty much the same story. But while he's doing this, he is traveling along the road and he's making his way to Jerusalem. I'm going to skip over the story of Zacchaeus just for the sake of time, but basically, there's a very short tax collector. Apparently, I'm not skipping over it. Very short tax collector that wants to see Jesus, climbs a tree. Jesus sees him in the tree, calls him by his name, even though he had never met him before, um, asked to stay in his house. And then Zacchaeus told him, "Hey, look, anybody I've ever like wronged, I've paid it back. If I took too much money, I gave it back fourfold." And Jesus is like, "Perfect. You you will be in heaven." Basically, like what you have done, your faith has made you right. There's a little bit more if you want to read into it or read it yourself. That's Luke chapter 19 or 20. Um, so from there, Jesus enters Jerusalem and he goes into a synagogue. And then day after day, while he's in there, he's teaching. It doesn't say how long. He's in Jerusalem and he's teaching in the synagogue day after day, assuming for a week. And this is the point where we're not so focused on his teachings, but on what is going on behind the scenes. And behind the scenes is the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who are religious leaders, are trying to trip up Jesus, trying to find a reason to get rid of him, to get him arrested. And the reason for that is because what every Jewish citizen knows of the Messiah, and I assume what the Romans have started to understand after they hear about the Messiah, is that it's prophesied, and the way that the Jews interpreted that was that the Messiah that was coming was to overthrow Rome. He's literally come to 1v1 Caesar, get him out, and then restore Israel and be their king, because that's what they wanted. Is they've had no king for like 300 years, maybe longer, and they're like, okay, the Messiah's coming. He's gonna 1v1 Caesar, win, become king, and we'll all be happy. And eventually, after you hear that enough, you're like, maybe I don't want this guy to come 1v1 me and win, right? Um, and some people liked the Romans in power. Yeah, they didn't like have their own king, but like the tax collectors and stuff like that and the religious leaders, they all could almost do what they wanted. For example, like if the Roman tax was 10%, I don't know what it was. But let's say it was like 10%. Tax collectors could come in and collect like 15, 20, 30, 40, 50%, whatever they wanted. And as long as they gave the 10% to Caesar, which is what he wanted, they didn't really do anything. That's a lot of times why tax collectors were frowned upon. Also, tax collectors were Jewish citizens, so it was kind of seen as a betrayal. But since Caesar's not gonna stop them because they gave him the 10% that he asked for, they don't care. So I mean, while it sucks that you don't have your own king, you can kind of do things how you want. So if you're in that position where, well, if they get overthrown, if my ruling body gets overthrown, I can no longer do these things that have made me rich. You're a little, you're not going to be super happy with it. So they are trying to find ways to like discredit Jesus, challenge his authority, get rid of him. Because something else you have to remember is that even though they call him teacher, they call him master, they call him Lord, well, not the Lord part, because that is a part of him, but they call him master, they call him teacher, they even call him rabbi. He's not officially recognized as a rabbi. He was not a disciple to a rabbi, and then so he just became he was literally from like the ages of 12 to 30, he was a carpenter. And then at 30, he's like, okay, I'm a rabbi now. And he started doing his thing. He started as traditional Jewish men would do that were disciples and became rabbis. That's what he started doing. So people didn't like him for that. And he started getting in trouble. Not like big trouble, but like things where the Sadducees and the Pharisees were upset. excuse me, because so they have what's known as the Sabbath day. And basically what it is you have 6 days to do all of your work. Anything that you have to do, you get it done in those 6 days. And on the seventh day, you rest. You do exactly nothing, no work, nada. Um, in our, I don't want to say culture, but I'll say in our time, we perceive that to be a Sunday, right? So you have Monday to Saturday to do all of the work you have to do, and then Sunday is the Sabbath. You do nothing. Like you may not even drive. You know what I mean? Like no work, no driving, no nothing. And Jesus would be in synagogues teaching and healing people. Now, they really couldn't fault him for teaching, but what they were trying to get with him is healing, get him on is healing, and saying that's him breaking the Sabbath by doing works. And then Jesus always had a response. They're like, hey, you healed that guy. You know, that you're breaking the Sabbath. And he's like, well, it's the Sabbath. Did you not untie your ox or your donkey from, I don't know what they're called, the wagon or plow or whatever? He's like, that's technically work. Not exactly like that. He's like, that's technically work. So they're like, he got us on that one. And he healed somebody else on the Sabbath day. And they said, hey, you healed, you can't do that. And he's like, hey, if your son fell down a well, would you not go help him on the Sabbath? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, that's kind of work. So, they were wrong there, and they couldn't do anything about it, to the point where they actually send spies to like figure out something. Like, we're going to send spies to see maybe if he like says down with Caesar, because that's what they're expecting. That's what they're expecting the Messiah to do. So they go to him, these spies, and they're pretending to be actual believers, or well, not believers, but actual followers. And they're like, Jesus, is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar? Because essentially he's supposed to overthrow him. And he's like, well, show me a denarii, which is the money that they used. And they showed it to him, and he's like, whose face is that? And they said, Caesar's. And he's like, good. Give to what Caesar is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. So pay your taxes. I'm not here to say don't do that. Again, I paraphrase a lot of what Jesus says. But that is true. He says, give unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. So now even the spies were like, man, we got nothing. And the Pharisees are actually starting to get angry. And I love how ESV writes it, because the lingo that they use is like understandable, because it kind of follows modern day slang, because it says they want to lay hands on Jesus. So if I say that, you already have a image of, oh, they want to fight him. Exactly. That's exactly what they wanted to do. But the reason that they weren't doing it is because every time Jesus was in the synagogues teaching, had a massive crowd. So they were afraid that if they went up and decked him in the face, the whole crowd, is gonna turn on them and attack them. It's different, like one on one, okay. One on, I don't know how many people there were, they didn't say, but like let's say like one versus 1,000, yeah, it's not in your best interest. The odds are not in your favor. So they don't do anything, and they're trying to figure out, how can we get this guy? And the way that Luke writes it is that Satan enters Judas, who's called Iscariot, and he leaves and departs, and he goes and he meets with the chief priests and scribes and says, I, the one whom I go to call Lord and kiss, that is Jesus, and we can arrest him that way. And so they gave him, I'm probably going to be wrong. I think it's like 30 silver pieces. And it's like, okay, for that, that's what you get for betraying Jesus. Um, and then the Passover comes. That's when they have a big meal, everything like that. And Jesus is sitting with his 12 disciples at the table, and they're having this great Passover dinner. And already knowing that Judas is going to betray him because he says, one of you will betray me. And it's interesting that that doesn't start a denial. I mean, it kind of does, but the way that it's written is what it starts is a debate amongst the disciples of who the greatest in the kingdom of God is. So essentially, Jesus goes, you one of you will betray me, and then they go, no, because I can't, because I'm going to be the greatest in the kingdom of God. And then another disciple goes, oh, wait a minute, no, it can't be me because I'm going to be. And that's what happens is they start a debate of basically like, I can't betray Jesus because of this. And Peter, who was older, he tells Jesus like, hey, I'm not going to betray you. And then Jesus is like, you're going to deny me 3 times before the crow cries. And then he's like, what? Again, paraphrasing. Um, but here's where it gets real interesting, I think, because from what we know of Jesus's life, he is pretty, what I guess, mild mannered. That's the word we want to use. he I mean, he does have an outburst of anger when he finds like money lenders in the temple trying to sell people and jacking up the prices. Not sell people, sorry. um Sell to people um stuff to use for atonements of sin, like, hey, according to Levitical law, you have to sacrifice this animal for your sins. Well, I have one left, and you need to pay me 10 denarii, and then they'll jack it up. Hey, 10, now it's 15, now it's 20, whatever. And that made Jesus angry, so he fashioned a whip, chased them out of the temple, overturned their tables, but otherwise very mild mannered. Um, but we get an interesting picture is his after he does that Passover meal, and he tells them about the new covenant, and he's going to die, and um, that one of them will betray him. They go out and they're in this place called the Mount of Olives, or Olives, I think. And he's praying, and he's like praying with his disciples. And then the book says, or Luke specifically records it as, he goes no more than a stone's throw away. So he's still within ear distance. And he begins praying to God. And this is a very different prayer than what we've seen. In this prayer, he's asking God, if there's any way, can you please take this burden away from me? Nevertheless, your will be done, not mine. But it's at that moment that we realize Jesus has been prophesying his death, but right here, he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to go through with it. But he's talked about himself suffering. He's talked about himself dying. But right here in this moment, he's asking his father, is there any way that you cannot do that? We cannot do this. Is there any way you can take the burden from me? But nevertheless, your will be done, not mine. From there, he goes and he finds his disciples who are sleeping, and he's like, hey, didn't I tell you to stay alert? It's a complete 180 too, because like right here, he's weeping, crying, please don't let me die. And then he's like, okay, well, I'm good. I know what I'm going to do. And he goes and he's like, hey, didn't I tell you not to sleep? Be alert. And then it's at that time that Judas returns, and he has a crowd of priests and some other people. And he runs over and he says, Lord, and he kisses him on the cheek. And Jesus is like, why would you do that? And that's when the chief priests go to like arrest him. Now in Luke it says someone, but I forget in the other gospels which one. It actually says that it's Peter who does it, takes his sword and cuts off guy's ear, cuts off like a servant of the chief priest's ear. And then Jesus is like, no, we're not doing that. And he goes over and he heals the ear, and he's like, go ahead and take me. So they arrest Jesus. Right now, this is like close to the end of chapter 22. They arrest Jesus and they start beating him, uh, because that's what you did back in the day after you arrested a prisoner. And it's interesting that these guards really have no reason to hate Jesus other than if he is the Messiah, he's going to overthrow Rome. Uh, they have had like no interaction with him, and they're putting a blindfold. They put a blindfold on him, and then they're like, "Prophesy, who's hitting you?" And they still punch him. And then Peter is met by three people, one a servant girl, and then two guys, or it's the same guy twice. I wasn't clear when I was reading that. The girl's like, "Hey, weren't you with that Jesus guy?" And he's like, "No, that wasn't me." And then this other guy was like, "Wait, but you were with him." And Peter's like, "No, I don't know what you're talking about." And then the third time, I don't know if it's the same guy or if it was a different one. It's like, "Yeah, but Jesus is Galilean and you're also Galilean. So weren't you with him?" And Peter is like, "No, that's not me." And before he even finished talking, the rooster crows, fulfilling Jesus's prophecy. Did I say crows or a rose? I don't know. But either way, the rooster crows fulfills Jesus's prophecy, and the sunlight comes out, and that's pretty much where chapter 22 ends. And we'll be getting into chapter 23 later tonight. But as for now, I'm the Wolf, and I look forward to howling with you again next time.